Good morning, everybody. How we doing this morning? It's day 3 of West. Are you still with us? All right, all right. Hey, I want to welcome you this morning to the future of Indo-Pacific partner collaboration. I am Paul Fredenberg. I'm the Executive Vice President for National Security and Defense at AFCEA International. And on behalf of AFCEA International and the United States Naval Institute, welcome to today's panel. I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator today, a friend of mine, Scott Tate. He is the Executive Director for National Security Innovation Catalyst at the University of California Institute on Global Conflict and Cooperation, located right here in sunny San Diego. Now, Scott served in the Navy for 27 years, retiring as a captain, and in his assignments included positions leading strategy, policy, and innovation efforts, working directly for the 3- and 4-star commanders in the Indo-Pacific region and back in the District of Columbia. He also held many senior policy positions that focused on Indo-Asia at the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Pacific Fleet, and then at 7th Fleet. And I believe one of his old bosses may actually be on the panel today, so that's good news. In his current role at the National Security Innovation Catalyst at UCSD, Scott works to improve the linkages and information flows between San Diego's national security community, entrepreneurial companies with dual-use technologies, academia, investors, and policy decision makers, those exact people that are attending our conference here this week. So, Scott, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for putting together this remarkable panel made up of our Indo-Pacific partners and our academic partners. Thank you so much. I turn it over to you, sir. Thank you, General.
Thank you, everybody, and good morning. Thanks for joining us. We are going to forego introductions, but the panel's bios are all in the program and on the website because we want to hop right into this. As the General noted, last day of West, they saved the best for last. They were planning to put us before the breakfast, but they were afraid we would have outshone the keynote speaker. But here we are. You finally get hold of us. Distinguished panel, and if you heard Admiral Cooper's remarks this morning, we are in interesting times, and the prospect of real combat, not only in the Central Command, but the Pacific Command is back. So this morning we're going to be discussing the role of close allies, particularly in the Indo-PACOM area of operations, and explore some ways that we might go forward together. So without further ado, Commodore Redwin. As sort of the only member of the Five Eyes group here represented today that isn't located physically in the Pacific, could you give us an idea why this region is so important to the United Kingdom, and in your view, why the Euro-Atlantic security is intrinsically tied to the security of the Indo-Pacific region?
Scott, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Admiral. Interchangeability, interoperability is going to be a key topic there with the microphone. Scott, thank you. It's great to be back at West for 2025, my last one as well. So it's good to finish on a high with some great colleagues on the panel and some great friends in the audience. I mean, strategically, why is the region important to the United Kingdom? It's all about security, stability, and indeed prosperity. It is part of our economic lifeblood. But as Admiral Parkin mentioned yesterday, for those who don't know, actually we are an Indo-Pacific nation. The island of the Pitcairn Island, British Overseas Territory with 35 people on, does have a little Union Jack flag in the Indo-Pacific, but it's broader than that, of course. Indo-Pacific matters because it's the center stage for today's strategic competition. 60% of the world's population lives there. 60% of the world economy, $50 trillion, is generated and only going to increase in the years to come. And of course, 7 of the world's largest militaries reside in the Indo-Pacific. So strategically, it's about the economy, our economic security, which is directly, intrinsically linked to maritime security, which I think will come out loud and clear from this panel. But let me take the second point of the question. Is the Euro-Atlantic security linked to the Indo-Asia Pacific? Now, I'm going to quote the First Sea Lord, and it's good to quote your boss, because that means you're listening to what your leaders are saying. But actually, Admiral Sir Ben Key, who spoke to CSIS in Washington last October, spoke about the relation as a not an either-or, but an and-but for United Kingdom, for the Royal Navy. But that and-but doesn't need to be equal. It needs to be proportionate and appropriate to what is going on in that region. We cannot rent out our protection of our economic lifeblood to other nations if it's that really important to the United Kingdom economy, which it is. So it's really important that it's proportional and we have presence and we support our allies and partners. But I think over the last year, as Scott and I were talking last night, as we reflect on the last year, there's been some really increased evidence of the interconnectedness of the Euro-Atlantic security and the Indo-Pacific AORs. Firstly, if you look at the partnership between Russia and China, the transfer of dual-use materials, enhancing weapon systems, Russia building drones in China, and China therefore enabling Russia's war in Europe. Well, that's a pretty stark example of the interconnectedness. Russia and the DPRK, disregarding international sanctions. And of course, DPRK soldiers now turning up on European soil alongside Russia. Well, there's another intrinsic example over the last 12 months of this interconnectedness. But the scale of this challenge in the Indo-Pacific also demands a coherent, collaborative policy in order for like-minded partners to cohere democratic rule of law and freedom of sovereign choice in order to maintain that international lifeblood. But I just want to reassure you from an island somewhere up in Northern Europe, this is just not rhetoric. This is just not rhetoric. Today, we have 2 Royal Navy warships on patrol in the Indo-Asia Pacific, HMS Spey and HMS Tamar. We have people dotted all around the Indo-Asia Pacific, and indeed this summer, the Pacific Partnership 25, the deputy commander will be a Royal Marine. So we're going to be contributing to that really important bit of soft power of influencing values and sharing our virtues in the Indo-Asia Pacific. Of course, AUKUS, and I know my good friend Commodore Frosty Frost will touch on AUKUS, and we're really proud of what that means and that development. The history, of course, of the British in the Indo-Pacific, I don't need to go over that one. But I think probably the most fine example is our carrier strike group deployments. Coming back to the but, this is a periodic pulsing of our carrier strike group deployment. And indeed, this April, HMS Prince of Wales will lead Operation High Mast, our carrier strike group 2025. Now, it's international by design. We have an incredible team players coming out with us, including my good friend from Canada. We got a Canadian warship coming, a Norwegian warship, an Australian warship will join. So it's going to be a multifaceted team game, and therefore this is the embodiment of the indivisibility between the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific from a United Kingdom lens. And of course, this is also not by accident. The European Carrier Cooperation Initiative, which includes Italy, France, Spain, the UK, has also been quite clever, I would proffer, over the last 18 months with the synchronization of European CSGs operating in the Indo-Asia Pacific. The Italians went first, taking their pizzas back out to the Indo-Asia Pacific. The French went next, of course, with their incredible cheese. And the British will once again return with our warm beer. And that soft power and that international presence will be an enabler, I believe, to proving once again how important the 2 regions are to the future of our prosperity, security, and stability.
Thank you, Admiral. It's a great lead-in. You highlighted the importance of the economy and the complexity of the partnerships there. Over to Admiral Thomas, it is a fact that the national interests of all the partners and allies out in the Pacific are complex and oftentimes overlapping, constantly requiring us to balance our desire for economic and diplomatic engagement and the need to cooperate with each other but compete with others on a security standpoint. Your thoughts on how those very divergent interests can and should be balanced?
Hey, Scott, thanks. You'll notice that I'm the only one not in uniform up here. So 8 years removed from a quick 38 years in the Navy, I have a little more freedom of maneuver than my colleagues. I thought so, but I see one of my grad students, Lieutenant Kirkham, over there. Hey, would you stand up real quick? Come on. You haven't had your knee surgery yet. Okay, Lieutenant Submariner, that's what's really going on. You know, old folks like me just kind of get to admire them and be jealous. That said, balance. And you mentioned the economic aspects, the diplomatic aspects, and then, frankly, third on my list is the military collaboration. The economic aspects for our Five Eyes, this five-nation group, the more we collaborate economically, frankly, the better. Right now, as of January 20th, there's a concern on what our trade relationships will look like going forward. So one of the things that we could all do is make sure that our economic house is in order. Strong allies with resilient economies, they fare pretty well against the other team. And what do I mean by the other team? Russia, China, North Korea, as mentioned by the Commodore, and Iran. Okay, so stack up Five Eyes partners, and let's add Japan and Korea, South Korea, because it's the Indo-Pacific we're talking about, and just kind of stack up GDPs from that team and our team. In that case, we're looking pretty good, because China is carrying 3 weights around their neck. That said, we've got to continue to make sure that that balance is clearly in our favor. And if we don't make sure that we maintain alliances through trade agreements, we're going to be in trouble. The second piece of this is what Scott mentioned, diplomacy. For those of you who spent way too much time in Washington, D.C., like Robert Thomas, you know that the Department of Defense is funded at about $10 per $1 over at the Department of State. Robert Gates said it best when somebody asked him in testimony, hey, what would you do with the next dollar over in the Department of Defense? He said, I'd go spend it over at Foggy Bottom in the State Department, okay? And we have got to get on that, train, and I'm, again, concerned about how that's going. A typical example is I spent some time with General Jim Mattis, one of my old bosses, just a couple of weeks ago. And our conclusion was, hey, there's 3 things that matter. Alliances, alliances, alliances. And if we don't go that extra mile to maintain them, we're in deep trouble. And that's where the military can come in. We actually, this group of 5 nations does a very, very good job of what I call military diplomacy. And we've got some significant budget issues to take care of in each nation. And one of my proposals, and I get in trouble for this all the time, is, hey, each one of these, if this is a body with 5 parts, each one of these parts has certain strengths, and there's other things that they need to cut away from, okay? New Zealand. New Zealand is, you talk about, the standard phrase, punch above your weight, got it. But I don't want them spending any more money on anything that looks like high-end combat capability. They have the advantage of geography, okay? And what do they do best? They're expeditionary, those things in maritime security and airspace security and humanitarian assistance, disaster response. If they take care of that, then one of the other parts of the team gets a little bit of a break. Australia. I tried 2 years ago, Scott remembers this. I went down to Adelaide and put myself into the buzzsaw of all things AUKUS. I pleaded with Australian, the Navy and everybody else and said, hey, do me a favor. AUKUS Pillar 1. Now, this is coming from a nuclear submariner. Just stop at Phase 1, okay? Make HMAS Sterling a better place to operate submarines. The U.S. 7th Fleet will love you for that, trust me, okay? But you have other things to do that are in your national interest. Stop being such a great ally and following the United States on every misadventure that we've been on over the last 100 years. Learn to say no. One of the things that's working very, very well is the Darwin rotational force training that goes on with the ADF. Great. Go put money into that. Or go put money into AUKUS Pillar 2. That's where that's where the leverage is, okay? Canada, love that you cruise through the Taiwan Strait, but what I really need you to do is focus on the Arctic. That is in your wheelhouse. It's it's a vital interest to every one of us. Oh, by the way, that other team has significant designs there. And the UK. The Commodore's comments I thought were great, but kind of need him to pay attention to all things NATO. Okay? I'll spot him the Persian Gulf too, Gulf of Aden. But I really don't need to see him in the South China Sea. There's other things for him to do. Again, here's a place where the UK is far ahead of the other parts of the team. They're thinking in Pillar 2 terms with respect to artificial intelligence, uncrewed platforms, okay? Autonomy, hypersonics. The UK is already, both on the civil side and the military side, they're the thought leaders, and that's where they can help us out most. All right, so I'll stop for now, get off my soapbox, and I'm sure I've made at least 4 enemies on the panel.
Well, that's in keeping with trends in the United States right now, so you're aligned with our national strategy. Well played. So what's shaping up here, obviously, is that complex region defense is a big part of it. It has caused, of necessity, a realignment of individual nations' strategies and of alliance strategies. Admiral Waddell, in 2022, Canada revised its whole-of-government Indo-Pacific strategy and has since then been implementing it. Could you give us a short update on how that implementation is going, and in particular what the implications may have been for the Canadian Armed Forces operating in the Indo-Pacific?
Hopefully this is working. Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks for that, Scott. And just before I dive into that question, as always, these panels allow you to react to the commentary from those who have already proceeded ahead of you. And a couple of thoughts. So first of all, Roger, great points on identifying the strategic context by which not only, of course, is the Indo-Pacific important to United Kingdom interests, it explains why it's important to all of us, Canada included, the United States, and all of the players in the region, and how the economies and the security issues and the interplay is so interwoven that we have to have coherence, and we have to work together to make sure that we understand and then operate coherently in that space. And I can confirm, yes, as you highlighted, we do intend on augmenting HIMAST this spring and into the Indo-Pacific, and we look forward to those opportunities. I'd also say, in response to your comments, Admiral, the Arctic is obviously a key operating domain for Canada. And we were talking about this yesterday at one of the other panels, that the value in the sum of its parts is that each player can operate and have expertise in different areas. I highlighted yesterday that the Royal Canadian Navy, like many navies, as they recapitalize, they have to endure periods of obsolescence, periods of where enhanced investment into operational capabilities within older platforms is necessary, and they might not be necessarily ready for a high-end fight in one particular domain. But where the value comes in is where you can not only augment but lead in other areas, and I talked about theater anti-submarine warfare as an example, where the Royal Canadian Navy has always honed its expertise there and can certainly continue to do so in the future, whether it's the Euro-Atlantic or the Arctic or the Indo-Pacific. But in response to your specific question, Scott, so yes, we did release the Indo-Pacific strategy in 2022. We updated our defense policy in 24 with our North strong and free. And in fact, we just recently refreshed our Arctic policy as well. And within at least those last two documents, Arctic does feature strongly in ensuring that we do cover that northern flank. With the delivery very shortly of our six Arctic and offshore patrol vessels and the investments that we are able to sustain in the Arctic, that allows that coverage in that northern flank that is so critical to allow the Five Eyes and other partners to focus in other areas as well. It's not easy when you look at the perspective that Canada finds itself in not only the traditional historical roots and of certainly the alliance commitments to NATO, to the Euro-Atlantic, but certainly the investments, the necessary investments in the Arctic. Adversaries are playing in that space. We know that. We know we need to respond and counter those movements. But the Indo-Pacific is fundamental to all of our economic prosperity and security attributes. Canada is a Pacific nation. We know that. We know we need to be there. We've been there for many years operating in that environment. But with the Indo-Pacific strategy and now with the updated defense policy, which is a $70 billion investment over the next 20 years, that includes resourcing the readiness that allows us to sustain up to 3 combatants into the Indo-Pacific each and every year to do the things that are asked by us by 7th Fleet and others, to do those transits in the South China Sea, to do those Straits transits south of Taiwan. And so these are important attributes that we'll consider moving forward. We'll continue to invest in those. And I think that at the end of the day, Canada will always be in the Indo-Pacific as a Pacific nation, and I now have confidence that we've got the right resourcing to make that happen as well.
Thank you, Admiral. So along those lines, a topic of discussion on this panel last year for Commodore Frost was the then in draft Australia National Defense Strategy, which was released in, I believe, April or May. So nearly a year on, having marked a bit of a strategic inflection, how is the new strategic approach shaping Australia's cooperation with allies and partners in the region, and in particular the Australian Armed Forces, sir?
Thanks, Scott. Firstly, while I've got this opportunity, I'd like to pass on our thoughts and prayers to this horrible event in Reagan, back in our hometown at the moment. Our thoughts go to the families and those affected. On the National Defence Strategy, and look, I had no intention of actually talking about AUKUS as my UK colleague suggested, and Admiral Thomas thought I would. This is a Five Eyes panel. But the National Defence Strategy that was released last year, it only served to reconfirm or reaffirm our Defence Strategic Review. It reaffirms our commitment to allies and partners. It reaffirms what our primary area of focus is in the Indo-Pacific. But I can say as well that it reconfirms our commitment to AUKUS and beyond Pillar 1. I would also suggest, in response to the Admiral's comments, that we're doing this in our national interests, and we're doing this in the interests of our allies and partners. I would also suggest that on many occasions Australia has indeed said no, and we don't just say yes all the time. We do things that are in our region, global interests, and more importantly, our national interests. So I've sat a few panels as an attaché over the last year and at different conferences, and discussing the Indo-Pacific as one of the nations that's in our backyard. My brother sitting next to me from New Zealand, that's our backyard. That's where we live and work. And over the many years, we've learnt together the significance of understanding the culture of the Indo-Pacific nations, and we've certainly focused on doing that. But the key word for me that sticks out in how Five Eyes can contribute and work together in the Indo-Pacific region is coordination. If we don't do this properly, we'll actually do ourselves a disservice, and we will impact our ability to indeed achieve our objectives of increasing our partners and allies in that region. We are all showing great interest in the region. numerous nations are coming and playing and being represented in our region. We must make sure that we do that respectfully and we do that in a coordinated fashion and understand what our end state is. If you look at particularly the Pacific Islands, what we see as our priorities may not be theirs. And I'll give a classic example, is most of those Pacific Islands, number one, their existential threat is climate change. They are focused primarily on making sure that their nation will be there for many years to come. And so what they're seeking from us, and particularly nations and partnerships like the Five Eyes Partners, is supporting them in building resilience, building infrastructure to support that. Being there as suggested when a natural disaster hits, being present, and to do that, not just being a fly-by-night presence, not just passing through, but doing it in a coordinated way where it's meaningful and addressing their primary concerns. So I think we've got a responsibility as the Five Eyes to make sure we do it in a coordinated way, and then as we bring other partners into the region, educating and letting people know that culture is key in us achieving our objectives.
Thank you, sir. Commander Parker, the PRC claims that our military operations, particularly those military operations of the 5 countries sitting here, are inherently destabilizing in the region. How do you respond to that assertion? And since New Zealand's so well networked in the region, are you hearing that back from other countries, or is it not gaining any traction there?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Just to give you all a bit of a context from a New Zealand perspective. So New Zealand's roughly the size of Colorado in both land area and population. Our per capita GDP is a little bit lower than the state of.
I'm sure you're going out.
The state of Colorado. Thanks. And if you were to overlay our search and rescue area on North America, it would stretch from the North Pole, cover Canada, the lower 48 states, much of the Gulf of Mexico / America, and reach into Honduras. But we do have one advantage over Colorado in that our Defence Force is a little bit bigger than the National Guard. As you look across my fellow panellists, I think you'll see a metaphor of how New Zealand fits into the Five Eyes. As a commander, I have an equal seat up here with flag officers. I heard a wise saying last night actually about a small ship but twice the sailor. And despite us being the smallest nation in just about every measure, you could think perhaps with the exception of our rugby prowess, where we're absolute global giants, of course. The Pacific is a core priority for the New Zealand Defence Force, with our security directly linked to the security and stability in the Pacific. Increased geostrategic competition and climate change has already been identified as the 2 principal challenges to New Zealand's security interests, and these obviously impacting the region. Reflecting this, Defence is focused on supporting long-term resilience in the Pacific, with an emphasis on responding to Pacific priorities and enabling a high degree of Pacific ownership. New Zealand's defence engagement in the Pacific is built on both a series of bilateral relationships as well as wider regional commitments. The New Zealand defence engagements and activities are directly supported by 15 personnel posted throughout the region: Fiji, Tonga, Papua New Guinea, Cook Islands, Vanuatu, and the Solomon Islands. The Whakatahi, or One Boat Partnership model, recognises our shared Pacific identity and guides culturally responsive engagement across those key areas. So to move on to the question, Scott, I'll start by laying out our engagement in the Pacific. We've got 5 regional focus areas. People and culture, and as Frosty has mentioned, we aim to build strong people-to-people relationships and enhance our cultural competency so we become a valued presence in the Pacific. We provide professional and leadership development training to uniformed forces of the Kingdom of Tonga, Republic of Fiji, Vanuatu and Papua New Guinea. And it is fair to say that out of the Five Eyes, New Zealand is a leader and the go-to nation in understanding and engaging with Pacific cultures. Maritime security, utilising our personal and cultural links, we seek to assist in resource and border protection, prevention of transnational organised crime and promote maritime safety. And we do this through enhancing partner maritime domain awareness, coordinating patrols and supporting regional initiatives. Climate resilience, again, as Frosty has mentioned, beyond New Zealand's commitment to the Paris Climate Agreement, we provide effective responses to severe weather events, and perhaps a little bit more on that later on. Regional architectures, we seek to provide strong leadership on defence matters through coordination with partners. We support and encourage forums for sharing ideas and addressing collective challenges and advocate for the region internationally. Regional security cooperation, we aim to have high readiness response options, both traditional and non-traditional, in support of the Bowie Declaration. Even on the face value of these initiatives, it's difficult to interpret any of these as being destabilising, and even less so when you dig into what we are wanting to achieve. Building stronger nations, not just in security, but politically through our leadership development and support to regional architectures. Socially through our people and cultural projects. Economically through building infrastructure resilience, and diplomatic through international advocacy, can only be seen as beneficial for the nations concerned by anyone that have those nations' best interests at heart. Supporting and strengthening democratic norms and processes can only make those nations stronger and more impactful on the world stage. So I guess, in conclusion, to a similar response to what should happen in the playground. The only one who is threatened by the little guy standing up for himself is the bully, and I don't think that the destabilising narrative is catching on, despite efforts of malign and self-interested influences in the region, due to our deep and enduring relationships and clear and open statements of intent as to what we are doing in the region. The holistic nature of our engagements is what gives us credibility and strength. We are not transactional. We seek to build and maintain relationships, and we operate with integrity. Contrast that with aggressive air and sea patrols in disputed waters.
Thank you, Commander Parker. I must say, spending a good deal of my time now in and around academia, being able to so beautifully twist a half-baked question deftly into a wonderful statement. You have a career in academia should you decide to leave the military. Very nicely done. So with some trepidation, we'll go back to Admiral Thomas. See if we can... I know, sir, you spend a lot of your time over at UC San Diego right now thinking about the operational level of war and the history of warfare and how all this has come together. I would argue that over the last 30 years, one of the defining emerging characteristics has been hybrid warfare and this use of pseudo or non-military resources to achieve military-like aims through coercion and creating de facto changes on the ground that we've had trouble reacting to because of our concepts of legitimacy and what does and doesn't legitimize a response with military means. The PRC, we've seen it all over Europe, particularly since the beginning of the Ukraine war, and we've seen it with increasing frequency and aggression in the Indo-Pacific. Your thoughts on how we might collectively work to counter that?
Scott, thanks. So the term of art used by Nora Bensahal and others over the past 8 to 10 years is gray zone. Hey, how is it that the People's Republic of China Russia can so effectively gain territory, gain purchase, which previously was the domain of armed conflict, of actual, very clear war. And the answer is because those of us who are, quote, supporting the international system have been so averse to standing up to them in a meaningful way that they will continue to accumulate advantage. Let me just give you an example in the South China Sea. And, my hat's off to Xi Jinping because he's a master at continuing to accumulate advantage over his ASEAN neighbors and, in the case of the Philippines, their treaty ally, the U.S. And that's this kind of phased approach that, and if you're a Philippine fisherman, you see it day to day. The Chinese fishing fleet shows up. It's massive. Interwoven in the Chinese fishing fleet is the People's Armed Forces Maritime Militia. These are boats that look like fishing boats, but are bow-hardened. They don't fish. They are there for the purpose of coercion with respect to the other team. They show up in your EEZ, they fish you out, and then they say, what are you going to do about it? And if you push back at all, right behind them is a very robust Chinese Coast Guard. I mean, this is not, a junior varsity team. They're building 10,000-ton vessels with lots of guns on them. And then right behind them is a very modern, capable, large People's Liberation Army Navy. And oh, by the way, over the head, the People's Liberation Army Navy Air Force and the PLAF. So think about yourself as a Philippine fisherman in that scenario, and you're just trying to go out and make a day's living in your own EEZ, and guess what? You're just crowded out, and if you push back, guess what? You're on the wrong end of a water cannon. So at some point, the punchline is somebody's got to get shot with something other than a water cannon. We have been unable, and Robert Thomas is guilty as charged as a 7th Fleet commander from 2013 to 2015, and I blame Tate for not coming up with a good idea when he was the EA. That said, we sat there, we watched and said, we're not going to get into, quote, territorial disputes. We watched the Chinese build artificial features, then militarize them, and now, they have de facto control of the South China Sea. So we don't really, as a group, have anybody to blame but ourselves. We conduct things like freedom of navigation operations, and that provides interesting target services for the PLAN, to kind of practice. But other than that, nobody else is paying attention. So back to the issue. And I'll go back to the first question. Hey, there's some economic things we can do. There's some diplomatic things we can do. And then at some point, we've got to be willing to push back kinetically. And I would say the economic thing, first and foremost, from the United States perspective, is go back and rejoin that which you were going to join and didn't, the Trans-Pacific Partnership in its new incarnation. I think it's the CPTPP. That's step one. Step two, all of these nations up here operate in accordance with the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. There's one glaring exception as far as a ratified signature. That would be this team, okay? It takes us out of the game in supporting things like the Philippine arbitration effort back in 2014 to 2016. We're always on the sidelines. Spend the political capital in Washington, D.C. to get our signature ratified to the UN Convention on Law of the Sea. The United States Navy is operating in accordance with it anyway. So that's step two. And then step three, you have got to change the rules of engagement for our operators and make sure that, yeah, I get it, there's a lot of diplomatic efforts that have to go on behind the scenes to coordinate this with our treaty allies, but we've got to be okay with what happens when somebody shoots somebody, because we may be the one doing the shooting if we want this to stop.
Thank you, Admiral. Commodore Frost, among all the things we've discussed, economics, diplomacy, military, intelligence sharing is a key part of that, and making sure that we're all informed to make the right decisions together. For those in the audience who don't know, colloquially, these 5 nations are known as the Five Eyes, which goes back to World War II when they shared eyes-only intelligence among the partners. Do you think our intelligence cooperation today is sufficient to need in the Indo-Pacific? And should we consider expanding that sharing network to other regional partners?
To get straight to the hub of your question, we could always do better. There's no doubt about that. Intelligence sharing and this great partnership that was established in 1956 is as relevant today as what it was when they established this partnership. It's at the core of our national defence strategy, sharing this intelligence. But could we expand that? Well, that's up for all nations represented at this table to discuss, and I'm sure those discussions are happening, have happened over many years. But we do need to increase our connectivity across the intelligence network. It supports our operations, it supports our people in at sea, in the field. There's so much going on, and what is the FBI proverb? The success in the intel business. The intelligence sharing? I've got this wrong. Secret of success is in keeping success a secret. So I'm sure that our position as a Five Eyes enterprise, we are optimising our intelligence sharing, but yes, is there opportunities for improvement? I have had this question before where people suggested bringing other nations in, and I've always made commentary that it must be something that is agreed across those parties that started this agreement in 1956. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, sir. And I've got additional questions, but it looks like the audience is actually very engaged. So I think at this point we're going to open to some questions if the panel's willing to take them, and hopefully that will prevent you listening and me droning on. Although I am reminded, last year at this panel we had an agreement that the Australians were going to bring wine rather than water to show off the growing economic expansion of vineyards in Australia. So I'm a little disappointed, sir.
Next year. This is actually gin and tonic in here.
Any questions from the floor? And if you would, just please give us your name and if you have an organization affiliation.
Of course. I'm Carly Welch from Breaking Defense. Thank you all for being here and for doing this. Admiral Thomas, you mentioned that Australia should focus more on Pillar 2 of AUKUS. Commodore Frost, I'm just kind of curious to what your response is to this. What is Australia doing in terms of Pillar 2?
I think all 3 nations that are represented in the AUKUS agreement are pursuing at pace AUKUS Pillar 2 opportunities, many of which can't be discussed in this room. It is very much a politically charged and community-focused agreement, and there are questions being asked in defence industry by governments of all 3 nations and beyond that to show evidence of what is happening with AUKUS Pillar 2. Focused areas are being discussed at the moment that can be shared publicly as well. But yes, we're certainly not just focused on AUKUS Pillar 1. We have strong engagement with both of our partners in AUKUS on AUKUS Pillar 2 across the clear focus areas. Now, service chiefs in our Navy have signed an agreement on our focus areas for AUKUS Pillar 2, and we're getting at those opportunities and those intelligence and technology, particularly technology sharing. And I think, and I'd extend the answer to the policy framework that surrounds that. Exercising a licence-free environment, particularly for many people that are represented in this audience, is very much a focus. If we're going to step into this endeavour, we've got to be committed to creating opportunities to accelerate and getting technology into the hands of our warfighters, which is the very nexus, at the speed of relevance. And that can only be achieved if we knock down many of the barriers to that, one of which is the licences that are required for us to share that. So Australia, and particularly in Washington with the State Department, with the Pentagon, with the Navy, we've been very focused on that excluded technology list to make sure it's as minimal as possible so we can get at sharing that technology. Now, are we there yet? No, we're not. The list that has been agreed on needs further review, and we're very much focused on lobbying, continue to lobby, to make sure that we can share, particularly in the undersea domain. I think in that list it's referred to as naval acoustics section. We need to focus on that. So yeah, there's more work to be done.
Great. Thank you.
And just for reference on the U.S. side, the RAND Institution has done some really interesting thinking and working on AUKUS 2. Stanford's Gordian Knot Center has done some good stuff, and working with Austrade here in San Diego, we're starting to map the collaborative ecosystems and look for where we have strengths we should be amplifying. Yes, sir?
Hey, if I could just pile on to the Commodore's comments real quick. There's one really kind of low-hanging fruit, quick kill, where we can all benefit in AUKUS Pillar 2, and that is those three countries have superb, in fact, the Five Eyes countries have superb engineering education systems and university research systems. Leveraging each other in that regard, breaking down those barriers that the Commodore talked about in the university research perspective, while also protecting that research, kind of nexus. That's where we can really move along in AUKUS Pillar 2 very, very quickly, and that one's ripe for, as I said, low-hanging fruit. Thanks.
Yes, sir. Next question.
Hi, Christopher Capon from the Naval Postgraduate School up in Monterey. So thank you for everyone for sharing perspectives.
Could you move a little closer to the mic? I think we're having trouble hearing you.
Yeah,
Thank
sorry. Christopher Capon from the Naval Postgraduate School up north in Monterey. So thanks for everyone for sharing the perspectives. I have a comment offer. So Admiral Thomas, appreciate your comments about the gray zone. We have an active project at NPS on that, and I'd like to pick your brains on the side. There might be some synergies there, and maybe some exchange information and some collaboration there, sir. Thank you.
Very good. Anyone else? You're welcome to step to the mic, or if you want to just speak loudly from your seat, feel free.
Good afternoon. My name is Dick Pear. I work for the Institute for Defense Analyses in Alexandria, Virginia. There was a very interesting discussion about the Philippines, and I think all countries represented on the stage are very supportive of the Philippines in some unique and different ways. I know Australia for intelligence support, Canada, I know, supporting dark vessel detection and so forth. And the United States committed $500 million of foreign military financing last summer to the AFP. My question is, the Philippines is transforming, trying to execute its comprehensive archipelagic defense concept now, moving away from internal security and toward external or territorial defense. One of the important ways, and this is your comments resonated with me, Admiral Thomas, and that is to in the gray zone, in the exclusive economic zone, in the maritime zone for sure. And one of the things the Philippines is doing is purchasing anti-ship missiles, over-the-horizon missile systems, moving from a gun force to a over-the-horizon missile force. and that carries with it a whole lot of training, for sure, especially in targeting. But that carries some risks, doesn't it? In other words, to have that capability to hold Chinese ships, whether they're militia ships or naval ships or Coast Guard ships, at risk, it carries with it some danger. How do you support the Philippines militarily in many ways without drawing the U.S. or other nations into a war? We're a treaty ally, and we're committed to defend the Philippines in the case of the United States. At what point do you continue to provide this kind of support, but steer away from actual conflict in support of the Philippines? Thanks.
So let me just come in on the first point about people. So a great friend of mine, Vice Admiral Joey Torres, is the Philippines Maritime Director. I met Joey at the Naval War College in 2012. And of course, part of the strategic question here is about how do we maintain those strong relationships? Well, I can proffer, times those naval war colleges by 100 with the network of friends out there and the trust. And we've also got to be confident that when we grow these relationships through education systems like the Naval War College, that these relationships play out today. And I can assure you, the coordination with our Carrier Strike Group commander, I've connected him with Joey. They're now talking. Because it's also about, as Frosty said really eloquently, it's about how do we now synchronize effects as Five Eyes nations in that theater to have a strategic outcome. And part of that, for me, is about those relationships, the trust, and Joey and I, we're connected today because of Naval War College from 2012. So that's one aspect of the answer, I think.
Thank you, sir.
Could I also add, you mentioned intelligence sharing. I think that's critical, but working with the Philippines and working with our allies to establish the appropriate guardrails that would provide awareness and reducing the risk of escalation remains critical. And I know this is happening on a regular basis. It's in many cases outside of the military domain, but that is critical. Very much analysing, understanding, setting those guardrails and understanding when those tripwires are rapidly approaching.
Yeah, if I could, that's entirely up to you, sir.
We've got a few more questions.
Yeah.
Did you want me to comment?
Absolutely, sir. I think the United
I
States
was afraid
is
you
in
were
the
going to
middle
say
of this.
that. So you mentioned it, and I think you actually answered the question when you talked about risk and walking up the escalation ladder. If we are unwilling to expand our risk posture, we're going to keep taking this punch. Okay, we can be as strong as we want, but if we're not going to counterpunch, and oh, by the way, Xi Jinping sort of knows that, we're just going to keep taking shots. And everybody's going to kind of scratch their head 5 years from now saying, wow, Second Thomas Shoal, that's actually now Chinese territory. How'd that happen? Okay, so at the end of the day, we've got to be willing to take more tactical, operational, and as to your point, leads to strategic risk. If we're unwilling to do that, we ought to just try to cut a deal now that's not going to be good for the Philippines, the United States, ASEAN, Australia, anybody else. But at the end of the day, and I know this is, well, how do we avoid war? Well, that's how we got to this particular point. We've been unwilling to take risk. We've got to.
Thank you, sir.
Hello there, my name is Brennan Garfin. I represent the University of San Diego as well as...
One of my former students, Scott, I'm sorry.
and ASML. So my question to the panel is, Japan recently revealed their new defense strategy, which involves AI technologies, these emerging stuff that we really need to be ahead of. And it's one of the things that they are really capable of, right? As an employee of ASML, we know that they're able to produce AI chips, that technology. Australia, New Zealand, England aren't as known for that. UK has a couple of those companies. And of course, this is a Five Eyes panel, but geography is destiny. So what are the allies doing in regards to South Korea, Japan, in order to support that and support the technology growth? with regards to those emerging technologies that are going to be the future of warfare.
Anyone keen to jump on that one?
I will just kind of tee it up for the rest of the panel because there is, in the Five Eyes countries and with DeepSeek, kind of a current event, a small group of Chinese engineers and supposedly $6 million piling on some other open source work, you can make a lot of progress. Well, that kind of leveraging is well within the capability of each one of the countries here. I get it. We love to spend billions of dollars in big companies and, kind of churn, but the amount of underexplored intersections that can be generated within these particular countries, especially, I'll say it, Australia and New Zealand, the innovation thing is not the problem. It's us figuring out how to remove obstacles from that talent in all of our countries instead of bogging it down into DoD requirements mush.
I completely agree with that. I think that there have been some positive signs that have realised operational effect with the employment of AI, and what that's going to do is that's going to start to seed a level of acceptance of risk, as you say, because I think it's at the core of it is risk and behaviours needing to change from a warfighter perspective, and acceptance that yes, that risk calculus may be different with the employment of this technology. And as I say, I think there's been some advances in certain domains that have demonstrated the utility, the acceptance of the fact that we have to get there. We have to get there at pace. We can't ignore this, but it will come down to leadership, acceptance of risk, and we need to inculcate that in our leadership, not just from a military perspective, but industry perspective as well, before we use these applications and put them in the hands of the warfighters.
I think from a New Zealand perspective, small nation, small economy, our isolation works to a certain extent, but when it comes to what's happening in the cyber world and that, you're never really isolated. So I think our what we bring to it is being small, being agile, being resource constrained compared to my fellow countries up here, and so that brings a lot of innovation and being able to do things like a DeepSeek type scenario on a shoestring, but using just some really sort of a different way of looking at the problem.
Could I just finish as well, Roger, if you don't mind? I'll just jump in. As a Romeo helicopter guy, I'm very, very much an analogue man in a digital world, and the amount of data that's coming into the ops room, into the cockpit, is well beyond even the smart young men and women that are getting into these systems. And there is data there that we need to get at. We need to mine, and we need to do it at pace. AI is the only way that we're going to be able to manage that and deliver. We see in the Sea Strike video for the US Navy the use of wingman drones. The employment of those systems will have to use AI. So there's a level of necessity there, but as I said, it's about risk management.
We probably have time for one more real quick one, and then I'll close it up.
Kia ora, good morning. My name's Katia Ackley, and I'm the Consul General for New Zealand based in Los Angeles. So I'm really grateful to my colleague Alan Parker for mentioning our prowess on the rugby field, but he neglected to mention our muscularity in trade negotiation meeting rooms. So my favourite part of the panel discussion today was Admiral Thomas's comment that step one, he recommended the US should go back and join the CPTPP. And my question is, given that's a really challenging message in the current times, what kind of reception do you get to that recommendation in Washington?
As of January 20th, I think that reception's going to be, it's pretty chilly right now. But, and I admit that the ellipse of uncertainty with respect to U.S. internal politics has grown significantly. That said, I think the road back to the TPP for the United States goes through Japan, goes through South Korea. Those very tight allies have to help us find a way to yes, okay? The countries that are involved here on the Five Eyes panel are absolutely critical to that. Hey, we need to whisper in Marco Rubio's ear, almost daily to find our way back to yes, and that's going to be a tough pull. Because we, remember 8 years ago, we snatched defeat from the jaws of victory, and we have absolutely got to get this done. This is the strategic foundation for all the other things we want to do, influencing to the good with our allies, partners, and friends in the Indo-Pacific. You got to the core of the issue. Tough one.
Thank you. And you all just saw the usual dynamic that happens in all of our capitals, where the military guys say stuff and get out over their skis, then the diplomats jump in and save their bacon. All right, well, thank you all very much for attending. Thank you to our very distinguished panelists. I think this puts a pretty fine line, or pretty bright line, under the fact that this is an incredibly complex region, getting more complex. That the role of emergent tech in military operations and in warfare is driving us to new levels of collaboration, and that these countries play a role not only with each other, but in helping our regional partners and allies who may not have been exposed to these levels of complexity and risk management before work their way with us into this new and both exciting and scary world. So please help me thank our panelists, and I'll turn it back over to the General.
To get that in. Scott and all the panelists, thank you for your time together. Very candid discussion up here today. I hope you all enjoyed the session. Scott, you summarized it perfectly. The bottom line is, economically, from a defense perspective, internationally, we all go together in this region. This is critically vital for all of our national securities and economic security. So thank you very much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, West is nearing its conclusion, but there's still a lot of sessions out there, so please check your app to find out what's going to be on your calendar next. And as you depart for the day, please travel safely, and we'll see you all back here next year for the 36th Annual West event. Thank you so much.